Welcome back, everybody. I hope you all had a Merry Christmas. Every year I usually go through kind of a rod collection and talk about all my different rods, but I'm getting too many rods really to ask people to sit through talking about all of them. So what I thought I'd do today is talk about some of my favorite rods, and I'm going to do it in two parts. The first will be about Japanese rods, and then next week or the week after I'll talk about some of the American company rods that are my favorites. So I'm going to talk about everything from big fish rods to pocket rods to keiryu, seiryu rods, 30, 60, 390s, small stream rods, small fish rods, a variety. So I won't cover all the rods, but I'm not going to promise there's not going to be a lot of rods in this discussion. Before I get started, I'd like to thank those folks that have participated in the rod giveaway that I have going on through this month. So there's only a couple days left, but I've had a pretty good turnout, and I'll be doing the drawing, and I should have the results either next week or the week after for that free rod that I'm going to purchase for somebody. So let's get started talking about my favorite rods. I'll start off with a couple easy ones, and then they'll become increasingly difficult as I get towards the end. So I may fudge a couple categories and give you my my top two or honorable mentions, as well as the one rod that I would keep in that category. So the first one I'm going to talk about are pocket rods. So tiny ones. I did a full video about pocket rods, both American company and Japanese rods. But I really only have the three that I consider pocket rods from Japanese companies. The two from Tenru, the 32 TA and the 39 TA, as well as the Anglo & Company Kawasa, which is a 9-foot rod. And obviously these two are 3-position rods. They're all wonderful rods. I've commented before as far as the cylindrical handle on the 39 TA. It's not always everybody's favorite. I don't mind it, but I do wish it had a different shape, or at least be a little bit bigger in diameter. But if I could only keep one of these rods, it would actually be this 32 TA. It's not so much with the 3 positions. I mean, let's face it, each position doesn't change a whole lot, but it goes from 2.8 to 3.2 meters, at the smallest and longest length. But it's just a great feeling rod. It's obviously more capable than the Kawasa, which I use for smaller fish more so. This just feels like it'll handle bigger fish. But I just love the fit and finish and the feel of these. And I did mention in another video, I did have an issue with the tip cap, getting looser over time without even fishing or using it. It just, humidity changes or whatever. But again, shout out to Chris Cameron for using his 3D printer and getting me one. But just a phenomenal rod, not easy or not cheap to get. And having to get them straight from Japan, but it's just a wonderful rod. The glass content in those just make them feel great for casting. So that would be my choice if if you twisted my arm and I could only keep one. The next category will be keiryu rods. So I have quite a few of those, but if there was only one I could keep, it would be the Swanabori 53. I also have the 62 and the 72 when I have a lot more room to play with. But the 53 is just unbelievably light rod. It's 3.2 ounces, and it's, if I remember right, it's like 32 pennies. So it's a very capable rod, but it has a soft enough tip to cast unweighted flies with a level line. So a lot of times I'm just using it as a overgrown Tenkara rod, and I can fish this thing one-handed. So it's 17-foot rod, 3.2 ounces, which seems silly when you consider you can get 360 rods that weigh that much. So 5.3 rod, but they're just super light. The tip, like I said, I can use it keiryu style, weighted nymphs or bait if you wanted to. I haven't yet, or just using it one-handed, two-handed. It's just very versatile rod, but just very, very well made, very capable. Tom Davis did a video not too awfully long ago where he was catching some really big rainbow trout one after another with this rod. It really demonstrates. It's nice. I like the versatility of it for the techniques I can use, but also if I need to use my weighting staff to go one-handed, or if I don't need it, I can cast it two-handed if I want to go with a long line or anything like that, or just fishing all day long. It's just a great rod. One keiryu rod that deserves an honorable mention in my mind is this Kurenai long, and it is long, one of the longest collapsed length rods that I have. This is the 61, so it's the Kurenai long 61R, and it's an amazing rod. First of all, it's pushing 20 feet, and it weighs, if I remember right, 3.4 ounces, I want to say. I'll put the number up on the screen just in case I'm misquoting it, but for almost a 20-foot rod, that's how insanely light this rod is. And again, that's one of the advantages of long collapsed length with fewer sections. It's a little more full flex to me than fishing the Sawana Bories, but it's very light. And if I remember right, it came in a 71 and an 81 as well. Again, this is the 61. And when I inquired about the longer rods with Chris Stewart, he mentioned that there's a Kurenai Long 2 version. A little bit different color. It's colored more like the Kurenai Pro Spec. Haven't bought one yet. Now that he's not, importing them. But it may be something I do in the future if I want a 7 or 8 meter version of this rod. But it's just amazing how light it is. It's rated down to 4X, so it'll handle most trout that I would probably encounter. Also unique, it has a kind of a black and white coloring on the end of the rod to help with strike detection if you can't see the rod or the line. Perhaps having that black and white striping on it might help being able to detect the strike. But it's soft enough tip, it's a soft enough rod, again more so than the Sawana Bori, but it's just so much lighter. The only knock, which is one of its great advantages, is that it's a long collapsed length. So again, not backpacking it. It's one of those I'd use more often if it was a shorter collapsed rod, but I think that would also take away from the advantages of the rod. It just wouldn't be as good. The next category I'll talk about are big fish rods. Now, you can catch big fish on a lot of different rods, but there's just a few that I consider in my collection to be truly big fish rods. The first being what Tom Davis at Teton Tenkara called the king of Tenkara rods. This is the Gamakatsu Suimu Multiflex 5.0. So it's a 2-position rod, 4.2 and 5.0, I believe it is. Obviously it's a long collapsed length, and it is only about 26 pennies at the shorter length, and then at the longer length it actually goes down to 23 pennies. So it's not a stiff rod, and with the mass of the rod it really loads easily. And it's another one similar to the Sawana Bori 53. You can fish this at its longer length one-handed, or it's got a massive grip. You can use two-handed and really helps for fighting big fish. It's rated down to 2X. I would never use 2X for it, especially if there's trees, or I'm worried deeper water where I wouldn't be able to get out to reach the string on the line on a snag. But just a premium rod. The other two are the Nissan Onyanru. This is a 450, and for a long time this was my workhorse rod. I mean, I just used it a ton. It's 20 pennies. It's very easy to cast, does the work. You can use a lot of different lines with it. It's just a great all-round big fish rod. Yeah, I can nymph with it, I can throw unweighted flies, just a really nice rod. And the other one is a bit stiffer, and this is the LTH 44 from Daiwa, the Expert Tenkara LTH 44. Chris Stewart of Tenkara Bum called this the best big fish rod on the planet, and I really like it. It doesn't cast as easily as the other two, which are more flexible, but I tell you what, it really instills a lot of confidence when I'm fishing it. It's 32 pennies, so it is stiffer. It requires a little more effort, so it works better with it, heavier fly or heavier line. But when I am, as far as fish control, this rod to me is one that instills the most confidence, and I enjoy, feel most comfortable with. One thing I failed to mention is the Onyanru 450 is also rated down to 3X. Again, I would not use 3X with it. I do know, a couple people that have broke rods, even the Gamakatsu. I saw a video of a fellow breaking that rod as well. So I would not use the tippet that size that they say they're rated for. They're both very flexible rods, so I think they would protect tippet while fighting big fish. I know Adam Trahan has talked a lot about catching fish on the Gamakatsu big fish down to 7X. So they protect it. I don't see a reason to use 2 or 3X, and not for the fish that I catch. The third rod is a bit stiffer than those two, and it's 32 pennies, and that's the Daiwa Expert Tenkara LTH 44. Now this is a beefy rod. It feels beefy. It's thicker, and it's a touch heavier than the Onyanru 450. Chris Stewart says this was, at least at the time, the best big fish Tenkara rod, and it's probably my favorite. I fish the Onyanru 450 more often, but if I really think I'm going to catch bigger fish more consistently where I'm going, this one gives me the confidence with that extra stiffness that I can control the fish a bit better. The Onyanru 450 requires a bit more patience. Let the fish tire out. It bends a lot more, and maybe that's just what makes me feel less comfortable or confident. But I really like this rod. It's a shame I don't think it's available any longer, but it's one of my favorites. The next category of rods I'm going to talk about are for small fish, and I mean real small fish. So it might be 3 to 6 inch brookies for me in the mountains. And the first of the rods would be the Suntech Kurenai HM30R. It's just an insanely fun rod. This was one of the early Japanese rods that I got, and just, you're mesmerized by them. Chris Stewart has a lot of information about these rods. Maybe he'll still sell a few of the Kurenai. I'm not sure on that, with them staying partially open. But it's just a fun rod. The tip is so thin, so light, that any little fish can make it feel like a good fight, and yet it has enough backbone where if you catch that unexpected 8 or 10 incher, you're going to be okay. The other rod, which is even lighter, and this is the Nissan Airstage Hakubai 240. It's 0.6 ounces. I mean, it's like a pencil. Now this one, I will make sure that I'm, catching that 10-inch fish, although you might be able to do it at least once. I would feel better if there's nothing more than 6-inch fish in the water that I'm fishing with this thing. It's just a little 8-foot rod. I carry one with me. I say one with me because I have two of them. One is the medium and the other is the stiff, and we're talking between either 5 or 7 pennies. So neither one is stiff, but they're just a riot to fish when you have a tiny little stream that just has tiny little fish. If I were only to keep one of those, it would be the keiryu, just because it has a little bit more capability and yet it's still incredibly fun with tiny fish. The next category of rod I'm going to talk about are small stream rods. So maybe small fish in them, but with the possibility of catching something a little bit bigger. You could certainly use the keiryu, and I have in fairly fast current, catching fish that are in that 10-inch range, and it will do it. I've done it, but it will definitely make you think about what you're doing. So the two rods I think are more at home on that type of small stream, faster current that I'm thinking of, and possibility of larger fish. The first one, also similar to the keiryu HM30R, was one of my first Japanese rods, and this is the Traveler 27, so the Tenkara bum, and I'm extremely happy to hear that Chris Stewart will still be selling the Tenkara bum line of rods, and including the Travelers, I believe. But this Traveler 27 is just a great little stream rod. It's 13.5 pennies, if I remember right, 9-foot rod. A quick casting stroke with it. It's actually a keiryu rod, but it is very, so it's got backbone, but it's just very light. Also 0.9 ounces, the same as the keiryu 30, but it doesn't have that super thin tip flex that the keiryu does. So feel very confident with it, and it's just super fun to fish. The other one is kind of a newcomer. It's a little bit bigger, and it's the Oni Coco 290. Now I've only fished this one a couple times, but I think Tom Davis has it right that says in time this will be one of the best, if not the best, small stream rod available to us. It is also very light. For a 290, it weighs the same as the Traveler, about 0.93-ish ounces, so it comes in under an ounce. But the flex profile is very different. It casts unweighted flies. It handled small beadheads with me. I hooked into a couple, 10, 12-inch rainbows in fast current and never felt underpowered. And yet the small fish are still extremely fun because of the flexibility of the rod. So I can't wait till springtime when some of the small streams are open where I can fish this rod some more. So again, these two rods, the Traveler 27 and the Coco 290, depending on the size of stream that you need, I think those would be the best that I have for small stream rods. The next group of rods I'm going to talk about are the seiryu rods, and I've selected 3 of them as my favorites for different reasons or different situations. The first one is the bigger brother of the 30, and this is the 33. To me, it just casts a little bit better. For most of the streams that I fish, some of my favorite ones anyways, a 33 just works the best for me. But it's a little easier for me just to get that perfect fly first cast than it is with the 30 or even the 39, which now you're getting into a little bit bigger rod. So the 33 to me is the sweet spot in the keiryu family for what I like, and it's kind of second cousin here. Is a really, I think, sleeper. And I've done a small stream rod comparison where I fished this rod and talked about it. But this is also the Suntech keiryu Pro Spec 33. So it's a little bit different. It's stiffer. It doesn't have the Lillian. It has just the little groove in the tip end. The specifications on this rod are pretty impressive. It's 1.4 ounce rod as opposed to, I think this one is 1.1 for the 33. So it's a touch heavier, but it's 14 pennies. So it's a fairly capable rod. I mean, 14 pennies, that's the same penny rating as a Oni Type 1, for instance. Obviously, this is a much shorter rod, much lighter rod, and you know, so it has some limitations, but it feels very different than the rest of the Kurenai family does. But I just really like this rod, and it's hard to explain why, but it's a little quicker casting stroke, not being as tip flex as the regular Kurenai, handles fish better without that insanely thin tip. But I really like that rod. And the last one is one that was kind of a, you know, I was late to the game with the Daiwa Seiryu 39MC. And this rod I've only fished a couple times since I got it. It was kind of like I saw one laying around with the Tenkara Ya. I had kind of kicked myself for a long time for not getting it. And I'm glad I was able to find one. They're discontinued, but they are amazing rods. For a long time, I kept reading about them, and then they were discontinued, so I kind of forgot about them. But it is a great rod. It casts unbelievably well. It's very light for a 3.9 meter rod at its longest length. Only downside is it's discontinued. Also has a bigger brother, but those three rods are my favorite of my seiryu rods. And if I were to only keep one, it's a tough call. The seiryu is maybe the better of the three rods. It's obviously bigger, so it's not one that I use as often. And it would probably be the Prospect 33 would be my favorite, just because of the added capability compared to the HM33R, but it's a toss-up. It just kind of depends what fish are in the water that day. The next rod I am going to call my most versatile rod, or you could say it's my favorite zoom rod of the Japanese rods. There aren't a whole lot of them that I have anyways. But this rod is the Traveler 39. It's roughly it says 3.2, 3.6, and 3.9 meters. It's a 2.1 ounce rod, so incredibly light for its length, like many of the Japanese rods are. And this also, part of this is sentimental value. Is also one of the earlier Japanese rods that I got. At the time I had the Sato from Tenkara USA, which, similar dimensions as far as the lengths and the three position as the Traveler 39, but when I fished them side by side, it was like I sold the Sato. Nothing against it. I like the rod, but at 2.1 ounces, the fit and finish of the Traveler 39 I think was better. Certainly a lot lighter, but this is just an incredibly versatile rod. Those are meaningful, length differences because of the collapsed length of this. When I go backpacking a lot in the wilderness, this is a rod that regularly comes with me more than any other rod, especially if I'm going into an area where I don't know what to expect as far as the water size and fish size. It's 17, 18, 19 pennies at the three lengths. So it's a fairly capable rod, and just with the length differences, it just makes sense. It was a well chosen name to call it the Traveler. When I travel and I go backpacking, it really covers a lot of bases. So again, I hope Chris Stewart continues to sell the Traveler. I believe he had told me at one point that the Traveler 39 was the one that gets sold the most, and I can see why. It not only versatile with length, but also versatile in the technique you're going to use or the flies that you're going to use. I'll use weighted bead heads with it. I'll use level line most of the time, but it will handle a heavier line or furled line, or even a floating line for some of the lakes that I go to, or it will cast unweighted kabari on a level line with ease. The tip is flexible enough, but it has enough backbone as a keiryu rod to do other things as well. So again, it's one of those keiryu rods that you can use as a overgrown Tenkara rod, or you can use it as its intended purpose of keiryu style fishing. So just a great all-round rod in my mind. Okay, now we're going to get into some more difficult categories of rods, because there's a lot of great ones in some of these lengths. And probably the more I fish, the water I like the most, not necessarily because of the rod, but because of the water I'm fishing. The 330 class of rods are some of my favorites because I use them a lot and they fit the water that is the most fun to me. So there's really two in that 330-ish range. I say 330-ish because one is the 340, and that's the Oni Type 3. Obviously the iconic camo handle, whether you like foam or like that color, it's just a great rod. For a lot of people, it's the rod that they like the most. And I did a recent podcast with Tenkara Talk, Jason Class, talking about if I could only keep one rod. And I had said the Oni Type 1, which is probably more iconic, but this rod I actually use more. And it's probably the one that I'm attached to the most between the Oni rods, just because I do use it more, and it fits the fish and the streams that I fish the most. And it's a little bit better for me as far as it will also throw some of these small streams, have deep little pools, so it works a little bit better for me with bead heads as well. But this rod is just, there's nothing I could say that hasn't been said about that rod already. The other 330, which is one of my favorites, is the Nissan Air Stage Fujiru. The cypress handle is the dead giveaway. The beautiful finish on it, and this is specifically in the 5.5 version. It is just silky smooth, and I did a comparison with including both these rods I mentioned, with the Prospect 33 of the small stream rod comparison, and for partly because of the feel of the wood handle on this rod. This is probably my favorite of the 330 class rods, but it's a tough call. That Oni Type 3 is, it's just a magical wand. How light it feels. The Fujiru is a little bit heavier, and you feel it, but it bends differently, so it's kind of a personal preference. But those two rods, hands down, would be my favorite in that category. So the next group of rods is probably the most difficult to pick a favorite in them. So I'm going to talk about several, but I will tell you which one is my favorite. So this is the 360 rods. There's a lot of great ones. The first I'll talk about is the TB36. It has the favorite of a lot of people, and rightly so. It's super light. It's tip flex, has some backbone. You can use unweighted flies. You can use bead heads. Just a great rod, and similar to it in my mind, anyways. As far as when I'm thinking about what water and fish that would work with, is the Angle & Company Wasabi. Similar in my mind as far as being light, being generally tip flex. Similar, I don't know what the RFIs are on those two, the Rod Flex Index. Probably not far off would be my guess. But similar rods I could use interchangeably in a lot of situations. Between those two, I like the TB36 personally myself. The other rod I think deserves mention is the Nissan Air Stage. Again, same Fujiru family, again in the 5.5. They're just all silky smooth. And you know, not as capable probably as those other two I mentioned, but and a touch heavier, but and more full flex. But you know, it is just again silky smooth, very relaxing casting stroke. So there's one other which I would say, all else being equal, which they're not, that would be my favorite actually, and that is the very long Daiwa Master Tenkara level line 36, so the LL 36, long level line. There's only 4 sections to this rod, so it has several advantages to it, as far as the flexibility of it, the lightness of it, because there's fewer joints, the whole works. But this rod just feels unlike the other rods in any way. They just don't feel similar. And this rod, to me, even though I've only fished it a handful of times, it's not because I don't like it. It's more like it's fine wine, you know, for special occasions. Obviously, I don't use it for backpacking, so there's only a select number of streams that I could use it for. It's 14 pennies. It's full flex. As a, you know, the TB 36 and the Wasabi are more tip flex, but it just feels very different than any other rods. It's hard to describe. Chris Stewart did mention to me in an email, hopefully I don't get in trouble for repeating it, but he felt that was the best Tenkara rod on the planet, and I can't argue with him. He knows rods better than I do, but it feels different. It's hard to explain, and I need to find more places to use it. And now that I am retired, and I'll be able to have more flexibility on where I can go and what times of year I can go there, I'll be fishing that rod a lot more. In fact, I like that rod so much, I bought the long LT 36 version, and I'm anxious to fish them side by side, to see, you know, some of the differences or similarities between those two rods. But that Daiwa Master Tenkara long level line 36 to me is my favorite. The one thing I would say about the Daiwa, it's not as versatile as, say, the TB or the Wasabi are, as far as throwing bead heads and unweighted small fish, big fish. It's a little bit more, you know, I would be a little bit more selective on where I use it, just because of that. It's a little narrower window to me of where I would feel comfortable using it. The next group of rods are almost as difficult to choose from as the 360 rods, and this is the 4-meter rods. That's kind of a good cutoff point between being light and castability and comfortable, to above 4 meters. Rods start to feel tip heavy and require a little more effort. Now the first one, I grabbed the wrong one, would be the Type 1. That's no surprise to anybody, I'm sure. It's a little over 3 ounces, 3.1 I want to say, but it feels lighter than any other rod, regardless, any other rod in this length. As far as its swing weight, again, just an iconic rod for a very good reason. They do come with bamboo handles and things like that. Don't have one, but speaks for itself. The only limitation I feel when I'm fishing that rod is it doesn't like bead heads, because it has a very soft tip. It's 14 pennies. Other people can catch big fish on it. I wouldn't personally do it for me, just because I'm not good enough with it. But it's just a phenomenal rod, which is why I had said before that if I could only keep one out of all these rods, that would probably be one of them, or the one. The next one is the TB40. I talked a lot about the TB36. In this, again, just like the 36, it's a great all-round rod, very lightweight. It will, you know, bead heads or unweighted kabari. It's kind of interesting. You can see the difference in the thickness between the rods. Again, that's very unique, and you know, with the type 1 as far as air resistance and things like that, and kind of the different approach to making a type a very lightweight you know, light rod, or a 4-meter rod. A little different approach, but those two rods are my favorite in the 4-meter range. If I'm going to do bead heads and need more versatility, for me, I use the TB40. And this one I'll put in there. Haven't fished it yet, actually just got it. And this is the Onyanru 395. Just a couple inches shorter. I talked about the 450 earlier. And so this is the little brother to it. I know a lot of people, this is their favorite of all their rods, and not even just 4-meter rods. You can see nice shiny cork, it hasn't been dirtied and doesn't smell like fish yet. So I'm anxious to get out and use this rod. Kind of completed my set of Oni rods, and I think, even though I don't have the experience with it, I trust enough of the other people that have fished it that say it's their favorite rod. So it deserves mentioning in this group. The next group of rods I'm going to talk about are rods that I would use for tactical nymphing, Euro nymphing, that sort of thing, weighted flies, high stick. The first two are both the Gamakatsu. I talked about the 5.0 version. This is the 4 and the 4.5. These are 3-position rods as opposed to the 5.0 being a 2-position rod. Much stiffer, particularly the 4.0 is much stiffer. So not super great for unweighted flies, but if you're doing just high stick weighted, you know, nymphing, that rod is great for that. And it is very versatile as far as being 3.0, 3.5, and 4.0. And then the 4.5, very similar, a little softer. So has a little more versatility, but also, again, very meaningful differences in the lengths at 3.5, 4.0, and 4.5. The other ones I would consider are the, again, common theme here, Nissan Fujiru Airstage Fujiru rods. And these, though, in the 6.4 are very good, much more stout than the 5.5 versions, and would be great for strictly nymphing rods. So those three are some of my favorites, depending on how big the fish are. If they're bigger, I'm going with Gamakatsu. If I've got more room, I also have the 410 in this, but if I need longer rods, again, the Gamakatsu are ideal for that. The last award I will give, or category of rods I'm going to talk about, is a family of rods. So if out of all my rods I could only keep one brand or one family of rods, which would it be? And this is a no-brainer. It's the Oni rods. And in them I'm including the Nissan version, has Oni's name on them, the Oni Onru rods that I talked about earlier, the 395 and the 450. So if you think about this group of rods, one of my favorites I mentioned, Small Stream, from the Coco 290 up to the Oni Onru 450. So you've got Small Stream, you've got up to Big Fish, and you've got some of the best. You know, I mentioned the Small Stream rods, or the best of the batch. You know, I got Type 1, Type 2, Type 3, and the Itoshiro. Also a 340 rod, similar to the Type 3, a little different tip sections. But that family of rods, if I had to sell everything except for one group of rods, I would keep those. Some of the best of any rods are those, but it's also a wide variety of rods. And if I were to build a collection around one group of rods, it would be the Oni rod. So hope you enjoyed this. Let me know if you have any questions. Let me know what your favorite rods are. I'd appreciate it. Thanks for watching.